right, Herle Burlyites, we've got a scintillating two-part pod for you today in the midst of one of the most important debates this weekend that I can remember. Hawkins cheesies. I'm what you would call a super consumer. In Hawkins customer targeting data, I'm the orange-colored bullseye. I reposted a Chatelaine piece on Hawkins on the weekend. Yes, the Herle Burly and Chatelaine are not mutually exclusive, calling them Canada's most delicious under-the-radar snack food. Well, some people were pissed at me for giving the story oxygen. They liked their little snack food secret. Others, me included, want Hawkins to reap all the glory they're owed for producing the world's finest and only true cheesy. As a researcher, I want to know, where do you stand on the issue, Herle Burlyites? Tweet me about it. And as a podcaster, I want Hawkins to know the Herle Burly is open to all sponsorship arrangements, including barter. Part one of the pod today, my guest is Deputy Leader of the Progressive Senate Group, Dennis Dawson. Dennis goes down in history as one of the youngest MPs ever elected in Canada when he was just 27 years old. Later, he chaired the Quebec caucus and later still launched one of Canada's leading government relations firms in Quebec City. We're going to talk about Quebec politics today. How is it that Legault can maintain such popularity during COVID when Kenney, Ford, and Pallister's numbers are cratering? We'll chat whether the federal Liberals can find their majority in the province of Quebec, and then a little bit about Bill C-10 and the role of the Senate. Part two of the pod is our ever-lovin, ever-blaspheming political panel with those members of the meeting after the meeting, Jenni, Byrne, and Scott Reid. We'll pick up on why is Minister Guibeault flailing so badly conversation on Bill C-10. Does he even know what he's talking about? And more importantly, will they regulate the hell out of the Herle Burly? Katie Telford made an appearance in front of the House of Commons Defence Committee. Good or bad politics here? And finally, Doug Ford has launched a big money ad campaign casting Trudeau as the boogie-man of border control. Can it possibly work for him? Plus, stick around so you can hear us throw our hey yous out into the void. Dennis Dawson, welcome to the Herle Burly.
It's a pleasure, David. I'm honored to be on your cast. To be very frank with you, I'd have rather joined the second part because I'd like to get into a debate with Scott and Jenni on all of those subjects. But I know that's not what you do with your guests, so I'll accept my modest role in the first hour and listen modestly on the second.
Dennis, you're very, very good at politics, but I would not put you into a cage match with Jenni Byrne unless you had special training.
I've seen what she does to you and Scott on hockey. You know?
Oh my God, Dennis! I believe that I was introduced to you. So you were a very young MP, and as you had taken an interest in the Young Liberals of Canada and mentoring young Liberals, and I believe that I was introduced to you in 1982 by our mutual friend Bruce Ogilvie. Is my recollection of the first time ever meeting you, and then we got to know each other a bit, and then the government fell, and then we reconnected. We reconnected at Canada Steamship Lines in the mid-1980s when, curiously, two political hacks found themselves working for a shipping company in Montreal, and we probably had somewhat more access to the CEO than most people at our level of the organization did, and in that little operation, to be blunt, you and I put together the skeleton of the 1989-90 Paul Martin leadership campaign. So, with all that, we've known each other for a long time. How are you? How are you doing? I haven't seen you, obviously, in more than a year.
And actually, it is a nine. I was co-chairing the leadership. I was co-chairing the convention at the Chateau Laurier when the Young Liberals invited Paul Martin to be their main speaker. And I was caucus liaison for the Young Liberals. Actually, I was elected 44 years ago next week. So I've been in this game now on and off in Ottawa for nearly 44 years. But anyway, I think that's the time we met. And there were a whole bunch of other people that came into our world at the same time that we've been working with, that we worked with on Paul's leadership, actually, 15 years later.
Yeah, for sure. So how are you doing through this? I haven't seen you since the pandemic, and I really haven't talked to you all that much, unfortunately.
Well, you were one of the last meals I had in Ottawa in March of last year with Jenni and Scott, actually. Memorable night, actually, for what I remember of it. But COVID. I got involved in politics because I like people. I like to get involved with dialogue, and I like to. And you know what? Talking with you on a little screen is not like sitting down with you at the bar at the Chateau Laurier and having a real conversation. So it's been tough on my version of what I like about politics. So that's been tough. I've been going to Ottawa for 40 odd years, 3-4 nights a week. I've been at home for 14 months. It isn't in my ADN to do that, but I'm sort of adapted to it, and I'm certainly we're spoiled when you can go through it, and we do our Senate meetings this way. We have our caucus meetings on Zoom and Microsoft Teams. So life continues. We're passing legislation. I'll be glad to talk about C10 later. I'm the sponsor of the bill in the Senate, and that's the part of politics that I enjoy, legislation. So we'll get to that. But I'm doing well. I can't really complain.
Good. You told me yesterday you got 2 puppies.
Well, our daughter adopted at the same time. We both adopted Labradors that are now 8 months old tomorrow. Quite a feat to do in pandemic, because the affection with dogs. Again, I repeat, I was gone 3 or 4 days a week. We've had dogs before, but I've never been at home all the time with the dog. It is a learning experience,
especially when they're that age.
And especially when I'm at my age, at 70 years old, I'm not as patient as I used to be. Whether it's a puppy or guests.
Oh, you used to be patient, or you're less patient than you used to be? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I should say with the dog.
All right, let's talk about some politics here. First of all, I think that a question that's on everybody's mind all across Canada who follows politics is the status of Legault in Quebec. So Ford's standing in Ontario is in the toilet. Kenney standing in Alberta is in the toilet. Pallister in Manitoba. Mo has got his worst ratings in Saskatchewan ever. And Legault sits astride Quebec politics like a colossus. 46% of the vote in the latest Leger poll, 69% approval rating. Quebec had 11,000 people die in the pandemic, and a tragedy similar to Ontario in long-term care homes. Why is Legault popular?
Well, if you remember the beginning of the crisis, all of the premiers were very popular. Everybody was up in the 70s and 80s, and they kept that for many, many months. The difference with Legault is Legault was not dogmatic about his position. He's a pragmatic politician. First of all, it's a coalition. All right, it's not a sovereignist caucus. It's not a federalist caucus. It's not a right wing. It's a pragmatic. So he's been governing. Remember, for months he was arguing with Mr. Trudeau, and all of a sudden he realized that this wasn't giving him anything. He stopped arguing with Mr. Trudeau, and they got into these. They still have an argument on because he's chair of the Federation, Canadian Federation, so he has to talk for all the premiers. So on sharing the wealth, but the reality is that they've done press conferences. It's François here and Justin there, and so they're getting along very well. While in Ontario, for reasons I totally ignore, Ford sucked up to Ottawa for 9 months, and all of a sudden he's now in a fight. He's buying ads, attacking the federal government, and he's the bad guy. So obviously Mr. Trudeau and the cabinet have been doing a very good job on a national level. And people like the only thing that makes Ford look good is Kenney.
It's true, but Legault's been doing the same things everybody else has been doing. He's been locking down. He's been shutting down restaurants and bars. He's been actually gone further than some people. He's had a curfew, which Ontario has never had. He's had a curfew, and still a lot of deaths, and people just assume that he couldn't have done any better. Why is he not paying the same price that others are paying?
Well, again, the peak of the bad problems occurred at the beginning. All right, the housing situation for elders in Quebec is not his fault. It's been an ongoing problem for many, many years. We have a higher percentage of older people. We have a higher percentage of older people living in housing situation. So obviously the numbers were going to be bad. But since that crisis, about 4 or 5 months ago, the deaths have started to wane. He has been, he did flip flop. Yesterday somebody was talking about he's flip flop as often as HIOP, for pancakes. But he's succeeded each time to adapt to his clientele. The people agreed with the confinement. I would not have believed that Quebecers would accept a curfew at 8 o'clock at night, but they have. And it's been helpful. It has brought down the numbers of contamination. It has given them the opportunity to better control when there are breakouts. There are still a lot of undisciplined people, but he has been a very good communicator. Every time he had bad news, he didn't send it out to somebody else to do it. He did it by himself. And when he had good news, he was right there front and center. And he's going to continue doing it. And again, he also has no opposition. Nobody wants to be mean to the premier when there's a crisis going on.
I ask you a weird question because I've been living in Quebec for the last year in my cottage in near Chelsea, I guess, for people that are trying to place it somewhere. And people seem to have some sort of patriarchal personal relationship with the premier, in that when stores are closed because he's ordered a lockdown, I will see handwritten signs on the door of a store that says, closed by the order of Monsieur Legault. And people will talk to me about the government's handling of this, or the government's orders and instructions, Monsieur Legault, Monsieur Legault. And they're not cursing it like they say Ford or something else. It's said respectfully, but it's very personalized. It's not like the government of Ontario's closed us down, or even the premier's closed us down. They call him Monsieur Legault. Is that odd?
Well, if you remember Bouchard, when they had the electric crisis 15 years ago, they had the same attitude. I think Quebecers in the time of crisis look up to their premier a lot more than Canadians will look up. If you prioritize politicians in Canada, the Prime Minister of Canada will always be ahead of the Prime Minister of the provinces. But in Quebec, obviously, people are much closer to their premier than they are to the Prime Minister. They're closer to their provincial MLAs than they are to their federal MLAs. In certain provinces, going back, running federally is promotion. In Quebec, if you look at Bouchard, the promotion is leaving Ottawa to come to Quebec. So it's a very different attitude. And actually, I can tell you've been in Quebec because I can see your little Quebecois accent since you've been living now for. but yeah. he has been communicating on a very personal level with Quebecers, and he's not tried to frame himself as being above the fray. He's handling everything. If you remember the first few times he'd put on masks, he was very awkward, but he adapted quite quickly. And I think, listen, I'm a liberal, and I'm a liberal federally and provincially, and I was brought up by the provincial liberals. But I have to admit that he's been doing a good job at this. And even though the flip-flops were extraordinary, he isn't any worse than the other politicians. And first of all, if you look at the planet, I listen to TV5 French news every night. If you look at the news on TV5 or even American news, you see the same problems arriving, estimates of deaths, estimates of recuperation, people rejecting vaccination. As everybody else, but he has made it a lot more personal than other politicians have.
Right. So what's happened to the Liberals and the PQ, the traditional combatants of Quebec provincial politics for several generations? Both seem to have disappeared. You just claim to be a provincial Liberal. You're a Francophone. According to Leger, you're almost extinct Francophones who support the Provincial Liberal Party, right? Outside of the island of Montreal, where would you ever run into one, Dennis?
Well, David, in 1977, when I ran federally, PQ had won provincial. It won every riding in Quebec City. And trust me, the federal Liberals were not popular. provincial Liberals were even less popular. And 7 years later, they took power back. Mr. Morrison came back. So, the Liberals have been threatened with disappearance for a long time. Union Nationale was their threat. Union Nationale disappeared. The PQ was their threat. The PQ disappeared. Mario Dumont was a threat. Mario Dumont disappeared. So what has always been permanent is the Liberal Party. And I think that the Liberal Party has to go through a period of rebuilding in opposition. They have a small market right now. It's Montreal, it's Anglophone, it's ethnic, it's Gatineau. But I think there's a strong team to build on. And, there's no way that they can override this love affair with Legault. And the division of the opposition is perfect. Everybody's got 15 to 20%. You can win all of the ridings with 40 when everybody's divided that way. But the difference is that Liberals' concentration will give them enough seats to survive next time. I can't promise the same thing for the PQ. PQ is the threatened species in Quebec politics, not the Liberals.
And is that a really encouraging sign that extreme nationalism or separatism is waning in Quebec, or is there some other phenomenon going on with the decline of the PQ?
Well, the left has declined in Quebec in general. But that being said, if you take the PQ and Quebec Solidarity, you're talking in the 30s, right? So there still is a strong base, and it's bigger than the Federalist base. But we're not polarized right now on a federal-provincial issue. You're going to be seeing in the next few days, or few weeks maximum, the language issue popping itself up. Quebec government will be issuing its new policy on promotion of French in Quebec. It's going to be very divisive. It's going to be very politically polarizing. He knows that he will not make any gains in English Quebec. He knows he will not be making any gains in West Island, and he is going to antagonize a whole bunch of people on that issue over the next few weeks. But from an electoral point of view, it's going to be good for him. From a business point of view, I think it's going to be bad for Quebec politics. I think it's going to be bad for Quebec. I think that Quebecers themselves are much more outward oriented than he thinks they are. So it's going to be a delicate situation in the long term. But nationalism is still there. It's just not being. Look at Scotland. It's back. It's back stronger than it's ever been. So you don't put to bed nationalist tendencies. They can lay low for a while. Trust me, I've always been very realistic about the fact that if you have a good flag stomping in somewhere in Canada, Quebecers will Quebec flag stomping. Quebecers will come back, and as you can see by these numbers, Quebecers are Quebecers first.
Yeah. So, what did you do yesterday? I'm guessing for a lot of you, it was some combination of going to meetings, scrolling your feeds, helping with your kids' homework, ordering food, shopping online, and listening to podcasts. All of that happened because of powerful digital connectivity, something that many of us living in the larger cities kind of take for granted. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, doesn't take it for granted. It's a mission for them to make digital connectivity more powerful, more reliable, and to bring that power to every rural, remote, and Indigenous community in Canada. There's just no good reason people living in our smallest places shouldn't have the same access to high-speed internet and the advantages it brings as our most densely populated areas. So far, over 450,000 rural households across Canada are wired into TELUS's world-leading pure fiber network. Since 2013, TELUS has invested more than $5 billion to connect 137 communities and 56 First Nations across BC, Alberta, and parts of Quebec to pure fiber. Another 410,000 rural households are connected to their high-speed wireless networks, and a total of 178 Indigenous communities and 430 Indigenous lands get high-speed internet through TELUS. It's life-changing stuff. The ability to work online, get medical care online, run a business online, learn online, even revitalize a language and preserve your cultural heritage online, without having to pack up and move to the big city to do it. As good as that is, it's a work in progress. The continuing evolution of 5G technology means TELUS's high-speed signals will travel further and faster so they can cover more of this vast land. That's all happening because of TELUS's continuing partnerships with federal, provincial, and Indigenous governments to get the work done. You can learn more about it at telus.com/5G. Let's switch to federal politics. If the old wars provincially have died, why is the BQ still popular, Dennis? We were predicting their demise 20 years ago.
I ran when we were predicting their demise. And again, we can talk about the PQ, the bloc, but the reality is on federal politics, Quebec has always gone massive. In 1984, 54 Liberal MPs, give or take, were defeated, and 56 Conservative MPs were elected. 9 years later, 54, 55, 56 Conservative MPs were defeated, 55, 56 bloc members were elected. 10 years later, 50 bloc members were defeated and 49 or 50 NDP members were elected. So it's not because they're all the best candidates. Trust me, you don't take politics personal in Quebec when you lose. And when you win, you might think it's because of you, but when you lose, you know it's because of the wave. But the reality, David, is we're there now. Except that, and I'm very optimistic about the federal Liberals for the next elections. They've been doing a very good job. They have a very good cabinet. They've been communicating very well, and they have no opposition. Even today, and we'll get back to C10 later, the way the Conservatives are behaving on the cultural debate around the C10, they're alienating themselves from Quebec, like Harper did when he refused to recognize culture as an important issue in Quebec. It is the most important issue as far as federalism is concerned in Quebec. People believe that the federal government has a responsibility in protecting, promoting Francophone culture in Quebec and in Canada. And obviously, the Conservatives have never had that. I think it's a very, again, the NDP are totally off the map. Blanchette has not been a very good leader. So I think the Liberals have a very big opportunity now, better than they've had. This might be it, David. We're not talking the beautiful numbers you and I had when Paul Martin became leader before the crisis, but we're still talking very good numbers for the Liberals because of the fact that the opposition is going to be divided between the NDP, the Bloc, and the Conservatives.
Yeah, and they have about an 8-point lead according to the average of polls in Quebec. The Liberals have over the BQ. It's interesting. How are they doing? How are they doing that? How are they managing Quebec so well? You said the cabinet is strong. Is the cabinet are the Quebec-based cabinet ministers seen to be strong in Quebec? Well,
you have big players. Whether it's Marc Garneau with Foreign Affairs, Mélanie Joly on language is becoming a superstar. She stumbled, obviously, at Heritage Canada, but now as Minister of Economic Development and Tourism and Francophonie, she's doing a wonderful job. François-Philippe Champagne is doing a wonderful job in Francophone Quebec, being a defender of regional interest. Lametti has been an extraordinary Minister of Justice, getting all of the agenda that he had on the table passed by the House and by the Senate. So they're having a good performance overall. And again, politics is the weakness of your opposition. They have a very weak opposition.
So I would assume, because of his father and because of his bilingual heritage, that Quebecers have a complicated relationship with Justin Trudeau. How would you describe it?
Well, they had a love-hate relationship with his father, and we'd still win 74 out of 75 seats, even though he would not be Quebec's favorite son at that time. Remember, if they had to choose between René Lévesque and Trudeau, they choose Lévesque, but they never had to. So they had both, and they always gave both of them a very strong support. Justin has had stumbling blocks in the past few years, but as far as Quebec is concerned, if François Legault calls him Justin, and doesn't call him Trudeau anymore, it's because he knows that the Quebecers are very satisfied of Mr. Trudeau's performance on vaccines, very supportive of him on the whole pandemic. You know, they're not shy of the billions of dollars that we're going to have as a deficit, because they also believe in strong government intervention, which is not the case for Ontario, which is not the case for Alberta. But in Quebec, people are not afraid of governments using money to promote and protect their interest.
Right. Do any of the other parties have anything going on in Quebec? Any potential? Any seed? Where's the orange wave?
Well, the orange wave was an accident. Was an accident. All right, we were very bad. Remember, Mr. Ignacio was our leader. I don't want to. And before that, it was Stéphane. So I don't want to get into those years that were very bad for our presence in the province of Quebec. So it gave an opportunity for others. And again, if I talk to you about the 84 and I talk to you about 93 and 50 people losing 50 people, you don't win elections in Quebec. You throw the bum out. You're throwing people out. They're not going to throw Trudeau out. It's not the same when the Bloc and the NDP won massive victories in Quebec. It's because they did not want the Liberals. This is certainly not the case. The numbers are there, and you follow the polling more than I do. And obviously, the division of that vote makes a strong Liberal victory in Quebec, one of the strongest we've had in many, many years.
What are the issues, Dennis? I have a suspicion that they're different in Quebec than they are in the rest of the country. What are the issues in federal politics in Quebec?
Well, I was listening to you with your Cheetos. Trust me, as you know, Quebec is a distinct society. So
they are not fucking Cheetos, okay? They're cheesies.
Oh, so,
right? Hawkins cheesies.
As you can see, I'm not in your market. but the reality is, I think that the management of the pandemic will be the issue. And if we're talking a September-October election, they will be judging, has Trudeau done a good job, yes or no? And I think the choice will be yes. So, and I think it's probably going to be the same thing in Ontario and in the Maritimes. So I think on that issue this time around, it's going to be a lot of the same thing. I think that culture will always be a distinguishing mark. I think that because of Mélanie Joly in particular, and the performance of the federal government on cultural issues, they will be strong. That will be an issue. The rest will be teamwork and the weakness of the opposition. If Quebecers have to judge between Justin and O'Toole, obviously the instinct will be to go for Justin. If they have to choose between the team that I mentioned to you before and the non-team that exists for the Conservatives, they're going to choose the Liberal team. And if you take away Blanchette, and you're a very astute politician and you live in Quebec, name me 3 Bloc MPs. Actually, I'd ask you to name 3 Liberal MPs and you'd have the same problem, but that's
another issue. Dennis, you're always busting me. So, O'Toole, will the Conservatives still at least win those seats around Quebec City? Do they still have a stronghold?
There's a book, many books actually written on Le Mystère de Québec. And when I talk about Le Mystère de Québec, we're talking Quebec City. All right, in
your hometown,
my hometown, where I've spent I was elected as a school board trustee 50 years ago, so I've been involved in Quebec politics all that time, and I've got a lot of affection for it. But it is a mysterious place as far as politics is concerned. Even when they had those waves that I talked about before, Quebec would always be the odd person out, in the sense that when there was a Bloc wave, they still, the Liberals survived in Quebec. Hélène Scherrer and Claude, so it's always been a little bit off. If there's a parade, we have the right step. But it's just not the same step as everybody else. So it's always been mysterious. We've elected 2 Quebec solidaire in provincial politics. That's left of left. You can't have. And at the same time, we have Paulus and Blaney, right of right. So it's a very mysterious place as far as politics is concerned. The fact that we had José Vernet was an important minister under Harper, and she was defeated in Quebec City at the same time as the Conservatives were winning seats in the rest of the province. So I can predict, I can try to have a macro vision of Quebec, but I have a very big difficulty, even though I live here, of having a micro vision of what will happen in Quebec City. We have two very strong representatives. Lightbound and Duclos are both very good politicians. They're very good communicators. Duclos has done an extraordinary job as Treasury Board, and he has been communicating during the pandemic because, contrary to Legault, Trudeau has shared the pandemic with his strong ministers. A lot of the ministers have been defending parts of the issue. In the case of Duclos, the financial issues, and he's done it with teamwork, and that's going to pay when comes time for the re-election. I'm taking those two seats as an example. We're going to be re-electing them, and we can make some gains in Quebec. But again, why are the Conservatives in all of the polling that you've seen still ahead only in Quebec City? Big mystery. It's not because they've done good for Quebec City. They were absent for Davie Shipbuilding. They were absent for Videotron. They were absent on all major issues in which the interests of Quebec were concerned. They never painted the Quebec Bridge. Not that I know why we'd want to paint it, but they've never performed in Quebec City, and they're still well ahead in the polls. It's a mystery. Le mystère de Québec, we call it.
Interesting. Can you tell me a little bit more about this language bill that Legault is going to introduce? Because I've not been following that, and you made it sound like it's going to be a pretty big deal.
I think it's going to start as sort of a white paper on what an example being the choice of Anglophones going to Dawson College. Francophones going to Dawson College. I think they're going to put some restrictions on Francophones going to English college. They have that liberty now. They can't go to the French. They have to go to French schools if they're French, and there are a lot of obstacles to go to an English school if you're in elementary or high school. But at the college level, you can go to an English college if you want to. So I think there's going to be constraints there. There's going to be constraints on how you communicate with the government. The government will put a very strong French first version of language, which they haven't done in the past. Lévesque was a very moderate. Bouchard was very moderate. Legault on that, I think, is playing to his electorate. He knows that it will be a divisive issue, and it will help his re-election. I think it's going to be bad for Quebec. I think it's bad for Quebec business, because Quebec business in Quebec City, Quebec City used to be a government city. Now it's an economic city. It's got and we're into high tech. Well, high tech, doesn't recognize French as being that priority. So it's going to be a difficult battle for him, but it's going to be an electoral one that will be successful for him.
Dennis, I've always had a little bit of understanding of the feeling about language in Quebec because just personally, my mother was of German background and she didn't speak a word of English till she went to school. And she became an English teacher, and I don't speak a word of German. So I know how quickly language can disappear. Is this still a fight that needs to be fought in Quebec?
Well, when you're a small number of Francophones in this North American Anglophone world, and even in a global world of English being the dominating language, if you don't make an effort to protect it, it will weaken. It's still being challenged. It's going very well. And actually, in the Rock, bilingualism has improved a lot. I've been going to Ottawa, like I told you, for 44 years. The level of French in Ottawa and the quality of French in Ottawa has improved enormously over the last 40 years. The fact that the federal government bureaucracy, I'm trying to remember, I think my first paychecks when I was an MP were in English. There's been major strides, a lot of them based on Trudeau the father's linguistic battles in the late 60s. And I think that this time around, that will also be one of the battles in which we will be, the Liberals will be, I say we, even though I was thrown out of caucus many years ago. I'm still a Liberal, obviously. The reality is that we will be, the federal Liberals will be battling for the improvement of French protection in Quebec as well as in the rest of the country. And I think it's going to put us on the right side of that issue, while the Conservatives are not on that issue going to be anywhere. But it still is a problem, David, and I've always been a supporter of Bill 101. If it had not been passed, we would not be able to protect. But I was also a very strong supporter of Mr. Trudeau's bilingualism policies, because if we want to protect French in Quebec, it's got to be protected outside the borders of Quebec. It's got to be protected by the mass of the federal government. We're part of La Francophonie. We're part of, it's very important for us to continue being partners with France and Belgium. I've been very active in parliamentary policy, parliamentary politics, and the fact that we have a New Brunswick delegation, an Ontario delegation coming to French conferences around the world gives us a strong power in protecting language, not only in Quebec and in Canada. The Olympic Games and United Nations. United Nations has 2 languages in the charter. So does the Olympic Games. They have 2 languages, English and French. Trust me, they've lost that battle many, many years ago. You can go to the Olympic Games and you won't see any French anywhere, even though the charter of the Olympic Games says there are 2 official languages so you have to protect it. You have to protect it. It's threatened worldwide, and in our case, it's threatened in Canada.
Right. Interesting. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Senate of Canada, because you transitioned from the old Senate to the new Senate, and you've been there through all the growing pains of this new Senate. How is this new thing working, just overall?
Well, it was a painful period for me, because being literally thrown out of the Liberal caucus was something that I took very badly. I think I believe in the new Senate. I believe in the fact that we try to select senators in the least partisan way. I believe that not having any relationship between caucuses in the Senate and caucuses in the House is a good thing. The way it was done was badly handled. But I do believe, and I'm going to, we in the Progressive Caucus are committed to making this a success. We will do everything we can, including being recognized now as a caucus, because there was a time where you had the independent senators and you had the Conservatives. That wasn't going to work. Now we have 4 caucuses in the Senate. There's a balance of power that is being shared, and we are working together to make this succeed. But it's a growth problems. But if you look there was a poll out yesterday that basically said that Canadians are satisfied of the depoliticization of the Senate. Doesn't mean they like the Senate. It doesn't mean they like senators either. But the issue of how you name them, I think, is well accepted. I have a problem, as you know. I might have told you this. There's a conjunction of realities that happened at the same time as we were leaving the Liberal caucus. We also left the Parliament buildings a few years ago, and now we have our own Senate. So we're a kilometer away from the House of Commons. So we don't have the coexistence with the House of Commons that we had beyond the partisan level. We are in 2 different buildings. Because of the pandemic, we are in different worlds right now. We have a virtual Senate and they have a virtual House of Commons. Never the twain shall meet. There's no, when you get to legislation, the dialogue that is needed to get a compromise, when you want the Senate to do a good job at giving a second sober thought to legislation, it's a little bit more difficult when you can't exchange in the corridors and start understanding where they were going with something, because you're only getting your communications through a very sterile communications called team, so there's no government in the Senate. There's a small little government caucus, and we've had 2 very good government leaders, Peter Harder and Mark Gold, have done a very good job in trying to do that job, but they did not have this. I don't think they had the necessary support from the center. I gave you the example. There's a desk for everything at the Prime Minister's office, and we know that we have a very centralized government. There's a desk for LGBTI, there's a desk for the Maritimes, there's a desk for Canada-US, there's a desk for American relationship, etc., etc. There's no Senate desk. There's no go-to person in the PMO when you have a Senate problem. And it means that now we're going to have, when we get back in 10 days, we're going to have a whole bunch of legislation that we'll have to pass in 5 weeks. And the Senate will look like it's not cooperating, but the government will have sent us bills for first, second, and third reading that we haven't seen yet. And they'll expect us to pass them blindly. Well, they created a monster. They're going to have to live with it to a certain degree. But I want it to succeed. And I certainly believe, since I'm one of the rare, I think we're maximum three senators that ever sat in the House of Commons. So in the older days, we'd have 15, 20 that. So yeah. I know that the upper house is the one in which you're elected. And as you know, I've always told you that I would have rather get elected than be named to the Senate. I still accepted it, obviously, and you can tell Scott that I really appreciate being there. But the reality is that I ran 5 times and I lost twice. I'd still rather be elected. So I have the utmost respect that when legislation is voted for in the House and sent to the Senate, we do sober second thought. We send it back there with amendments, and we've done very good amendments in the past as well as in the recent past. We've done a very good job at getting the government to improve its legislation. But at the end, there's no doubt in my mind that if the House adopts a second time legislation, it's over, and they're the ones that deserve. Some of my independent colleagues, actually,
I was going to ask you, do they share that view? Because they're different.
Too many of them have never had the pragmatic side of politics, and they think they're right, and they might actually be right. But the reality is that they weren't elected. The elected House has the final word, but sometimes when you get into that debate, the final word is next week. And you have to pass, as you know, most legislation in Ottawa, in Queen's Park, and Quebec is passed during June and December. You know, when the legislation is winding down, you pass as many bills as you can. Well, at that time, the obstination of trying to perfection is the enemy of the good. And sometimes some of my colleagues will look for perfection. I'll say, well, if you're looking for perfection, the bill might die. And if the bill dies, we're not going to be any better off in the future if legislation is not passed. Normally, and it's not. I don't think that the worry right now is that the Conservatives will win the next election. But if some of the progressive bills that the Liberals have in front of us or are going to be sending to us over the next few weeks, if we don't pass them, they're going to probably die if there's an election. So they're a different crowd. But
so Dennis,
they've had excellent nominations. I would say that of the 50 odd nominations that have been done through the system, but they do not have what we have now in the Progressive and in the Canadian Senators group. We have a team spirit, and you have to work as a team. You can have the best individuals, but politics is a team sport.
So you said that you would rather be elected than be a senator. And I know that that's true of you. And God knows, I wish you'd been elected in 2004. But is that true now? I mean, an independent senator, would you rather be a backbench government member of parliament than an independent senator?
Well,
it seems to be like you have a lot more influence as a senator.
Well, I have to admit that I make the distinction during the last 13, 14 months, because I would be embarrassed to be an MP, because one of the powers of an MP is Wednesday morning caucus. That is where an MP on policy, you have a day-to-day work to do as an MP in protecting the interest of your voters and protecting the interest of the city you represent and representing the clienteles you represent. But when you get involved in policy, it is normally in caucus. It is normally in caucus, in party caucuses, in which you start developing the program the government will be working on over the next few. That is a little bit more difficult to do on Zoom. It's a lot more difficult to do on team. You know, you cannot get that input as well as you can get it when you have a Wednesday morning, because You know, you can. I think that over those 40 odd years that I've been in out of caucus, I believe in the confidentiality of what happens in caucus, and for most purposes, even the worst years of the Liberals, and we were there at that time, David. Very little leaks would come out of caucus. You'd have murmurs about what was said, but you wouldn't have. Today, you can't imagine that if you're on a Zoom meeting that you're going to be telling your 150 colleagues, I don't want you to mention this publicly, but I think this guy is an asshole. You know, but you know, we could attack some ministers for their misbehaving in caucus in private. You can't do that on Zoom. You can't do that in this virtual environment. And politics is should not be done in a virtual world. It should be done in a real world, because if you know, a lot of the misunderstanding on certain bills and the delay in passing certain legislation is based on the fact that there was a misunderstanding because of the fact that this is it's not the ideal way to pass legislation, and there's a price to be paid. But I think that I'm quite optimistic for the end of this crisis, and we'll go back to the real world. But I also believe we'll go back also to continuing having these virtual meetings, because for practical reasons, we've had witnesses from across the country appearing at Senate committees that we would not have had we asked them to fly into Ottawa to appear to represent their interests, whether it's the Maritimes or Western Canada. We usually have the Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal crowd appearing at committee meetings. Now we have really a pan-Canadian presence of witnesses, and I think that's better. So we'll have to keep part of that, but I'm hopeful that we'll go back to real politics with real people in real rooms as soon as we get back next autumn.
These independent senators that have been appointed, I know that they're not partisan Liberals, because the very last thing you would want to be to get appointed to the Senate would be a partisan Liberal. Now, so they're not big L Liberals. Are they mostly small L Liberals? Are they mostly people that are comfortable with this government's approach? Would they be more problematic to a conservative government, for example?
Well, again, if we were to take the hypothesis of having a conservative government, there is no Liberal opposition, because one of the productive, and I'm not a big fan of the Conservative Party per se, but I think they have a duty in the Senate. They work as a caucus, and they oppose government legislation. They force government to be careful, and I believe that an opposition is useful in the Senate as well as in the House of Commons. Obviously, a strong opposition makes for better government. But the independents don't have that past experience in politics. Not only did they not have that many former Liberals they did not name politicians to a political game, and it is a political game. I think that I would hope that there are 14 openings right now, that I don't want them to name necessarily to name Liberals, but to name a few people that have parliamentary. Hello, David. I know what you said. I remember what you said about fuck Dawson on your show.
You got my spot. I got that.
Yeah. I can imagine you as a Quebec senator announcing that I have land in Quebec. Name me. You know. The makeup of the Senate is a very high quality. The team approach is a little bit weak. Were we to go into where the Conservatives to win, it would be a very dysfunctional situation where you'd have 20 Conservative senators and 90 senators or 80 senators that don't support the government. We've had that. We've had major times in the past where the Senate was Liberal and the government was Conservative, and vice versa. But we'd be pragmatic politicians, and like I said before, that we know that the government, the elected Parliament is the one that decides.
Not McEachen.
Well,
Not McEachern. Do you remember McEachern?
He created the new Senate much more than naming senators independently. He gave senators the mandate to assume their mandate of sober second thought. I think he was a very forceful leader in the Senate, and I certainly believe. When I arrived in '77, senators were not very active they were active in the party. They were very active in the party, but they weren't very active in policy development. Obviously, that changed a lot with McEachern and his attitude towards assuming responsibility as a majority majority opposition in the Senate. He did his job, but again, at the end, and sometimes it would take a lot of bell ringing and a few hunger strikes, legislation would pass. I would look. If the Conservatives, and there was a poll that came out yesterday, like I told you, about the fact that the people believe that this new process of naming senators is good. The Conservatives still have every intention of naming Conservatives to the Senate. Well, by the time they make it, they'll be 15, and it'll take them 100 years to get back to a majority Conservative in the Senate. So that will not be functional. They'll have to work with the people that are there. So there'll be a strong period of, were that to happen, when that will happen, there'll be a big difficulty of adapting to this new reality, because the rules have not been changed. We have, after 5 years, finally have legislation in the Senate. It was tabled last week, in which we recognize the fact that we have an independent Senate. The Senate does not choose its speaker. The Senate does not choose its deputy speaker. The Senate does not choose its clerk. We're supposed to be an independent institution, but the Privy Council decides who the bosses of that independent institution are going to be. Well, that's going to have to, if we're going to have an independent Senate, it will have to assume its independence. And that's going to be a bigger challenge if the Liberals were to go in opposition.
Right. Okay. So just quickly, you mentioned at the beginning that you are in charge of Bill 10 in the Senate, Bill C-10 in the Senate. And just clear this up for me, if you will. My understanding is that as soon as the Herle Burly gets big enough, that the government's going to step in and start telling us what we can and can't say about the cabinet, right?
I would love you to be popular enough that the bill would control you. But trust me, it is not the intention of the government to control the participation of people in social media. It is far. The fact is that 30 odd years ago, we passed legislation to modernize the communications in Canada, Telecommunications Act in Canada. Since then, they've invented the internet. So we have to respect Al Gore, as you know. He invented it. He did not invent it. He did not invent it for Quebec and Canada. If we want to protect our culture, if we want to promote our culture, if we want to promote Canadian participation in broadcasting, we have to have rules that apply to the Netflix of the world. We have to have rules that protect the fact that producers in Canada should get some money back from the billions of dollars that have leaked through the fact that we do not have control of that part of the broadcasting world. It is broadcasting now. I know Cheetahs, I'm going to remember the name of your product, but it will not make the economic balance, will not displace the economic balance of advertising in Canada. But what has happened over the last 20 years is that money that was being spent in supporting Canadian media is now being spent in supporting international institutions like Google and Facebook and Twitter and Netflix. And we need to have some control is a big word. We have to get some benefits out of that. That is what, if we had not created the CRTC, if we had not given ourselves rules in the late 60s to control Canadian content, and in particular as a Quebecer, to control Francophone presence in the media, we would not have any Canadian broadcasting system that we have now. It's a very vibrant, it's a very successful. We are players on the international field. We win Golden Globes. We don't want to brag about them anymore, but we win Golden Globes. We in the weekend is the tops. So we've done that because we gave ourselves tools to do it. The tools are not modernized with its flaws. With its flaws, because it has flaws, C10, and it's still in the House, so I don't know what the final product will be. I don't think you'll be attacked by the final product. You can feel secure about that. They won't go to Chelsea and try to find you and try to take away your advertisers. But they will want to have some economic benefit of people that are making money off this broadcasting side of it that has not been flowing back to help Canadian content.
Okay. So the minister has been a very high profile and very popular figure in Quebec for some time based on his work on the environment, but a very public figure, handled himself in a lot of different circumstances on controversial issues in a way that made him a respected and esteemed person. He's shitting the bed on this bill. Sometimes when people struggle with communications, it's because there's a problem in the product that they're trying to sell and that there's a conflict that they can't talk their way around. Is there something about this bill that needs to change? Because he can't explain it to people's satisfaction.
Part of the problem, first of all, trust me, the support in Quebec is total. The stakeholders, and actually the stakeholders in Canada, all right, the producers, the people that do Canadian broadcasting, they support the bill. They recognize it's got flaws. There is a misunderstanding about trying to control free speech. That was mishandled both in committee and by the minister. But I think that there's going to be, first of all, you'll have the Minister of Justice appearing at the end of the week saying that it is not a charter attempt to control free speech and that it will be recognized as respectful of Canadian traditions as far as free speech is concerned. There is no takeover of we don't want to take over podcasts. We don't want to stop. We're not attacking the kittens on producing home videos. We're not attacking. That's not what it's about. It's about Canadian cultural content. And they might have had major problems in communicating it, but it doesn't change the product. The product is good. And 30 years is a long delay in modernizing. The fact that internet has never been controlled. We're lucky. We're lucky that it hasn't done more damage than it has. As you know, and as most broadcasters know, billions of dollars have left the advertising world of Canadian in Canada, and it's gone. Whether it's newspapers, whether it's television, whether it's radio, billions of dollars have left. We're not going to get them back, but we have to be sure that for the long-term interest of Canadian culture, Canadian product, Canadian broadcasting, that we protect the interest of Canadians and Quebecers, obviously.
Awesome. Dennis, you should be the minister.
I couldn't get elected. I know you tried. I know you tried.
No, I knew better than to try. The only time I tried is when I knew it would fail. I have no electability about me, Dennis. People never... No, it's not going to happen. In any event, thank you for coming on. Just as a friend, it's been so great to shoot the shit with you for an hour and get caught up. And God, let's do this with a bottle of wine as quickly as we can.
I told you I was humbled by your invitation. I was surprised. But I appreciate it. I've been a fan of you and a fan of the show for since you've been on, and I'm happy I did it. And I know Scott is probably good. I would have rather be able to defend myself when Scott starts attacking me later on, but I'll have to send him emails.
Dennis, you've been my go-to Quebec guru for 40 years, and I'm super glad that you came on to do this. The only thing that could have made it better is if we could have been joined by Lapierre to kick these issues around. But,
I miss him every day. I miss him every day.
Yeah, don't we all? All right, brother. Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye. So, Canadian grain is big. Booming, actually. In April, our sponsor CN set a record for moving grain out of Western Canada for the 14th consecutive month. I won't get too far into the statistics, but so far during the current crop year, CN has moved more than 25.6 million metric tons. That's 17% more than last year. There are a bunch of reasons for that. Demand is growing in North America and worldwide. There's no better grain than Canadian grain, and people around the world are hungry. Canadian farmers have worked relentlessly to meet the demand, deploying new techniques and technologies. And so has CN. The company has been expanding its fleet of hopper cars, which are specialized containers that allow grain to be loaded in the top and unloaded through openings at the bottom. CN has placed several orders for new generation, high-capacity hopper cars in the last few years, most recently with Trinity Rail. It's all part of a plan to build and renew a fleet of 6,000 hopper cars over the next 3 years. They will serve shippers and customers across Canada, the U.S., and, CN hopes, Mexico. CN knows the economies of North America's 3 sovereign nations are gradually and inevitably knitting together. We have a new, updated free trade treaty, and CN's vision is to become the first truly North American railway. CN's network already spans Canada and the United States, and now it's in talks to merge with Kansas City Southern, another Class 1 railway with tracks extending deep into Mexico. It's a big deal. CN's offer is $30 billion. That's because CN understands we live on a connected continent, and the companies that are prepared to invest are the companies that will lead their industries. All right, Tuesday morning. Jenni Byrne, how are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm excellent. Scott Reid, for those people who aren't watching, you have a haircut, and I want to know whether you are an anti-vaxxer or whether you're a white supremacist.
No, it's just the beard's a bushy. I'm doing this in stages. It's kind of like
it's Amish. You look Amish.
I look Amish now. I've got the short hair, the big bushy beard. I'm selling berry pies and starting my own church. It's great. Financial donations. You have to listen to my sermons about the music of Bob Dylan. It's gonna be, it's gonna be a whole new thing for me.
No, you look very cleaned up, as my uncle would say. You're all done up like a cinnamon bear.
That's me. That's me. I'm a cinnamon bear. Cinnamon goat. I'm going to shave the rest. I'm going to trim this thing down later today, I think, and get rid of this, and I'll go almost back to being a normal human being, but not in my head. In my head, I'm still a crazy person who lives under the overpass and drinks from bottles he finds in the ditch.
These are your fantasies. This is what you aspire to.
That's exactly what I aspire to. I hate to
So what were you doing?
Shed all the burdens of modern life. Just like chew stuff out of bottle caps. That's exactly the life for me, man. Piss on this.
I can see that not one of us took L. Ian MacDonald's advice last night on Twitter, which was for us to all wear our Habs paraphernalia and memorabilia and to have it all over our sets to celebrate their slithering into the playoffs last night in the most ignominious way possible. Well, I didn't feel that celebratory about that.
I agree. I didn't. I feel like I'm part of to blame because, we talked about 3 months ago when I ordered my Carey Price jersey to replace my Patrick Waugh jersey that I had bought in November of 1995. I feel that was like kind of the equivalent of a scarlet letter for Carey Price and the and the Habs, and so I just couldn't put it on today.
No,
I have mixed feelings. I know I'm less down than you are, Dave. I'm from my they slithered in, they backed into it. This is a team, as you joked last night, that looks forward to what Jake Evans can produce in comparison to Austin Matthews or Connor McDavid. But I'm just grateful to have them in the playoffs. So my 11-year-old cares so much about seeing them play. So happy they'll be in the playoffs, and so it just it gives me 4 more nights of joy. So.
Yeah. 4 or 5 max, I think.
Man, I don't know. Toronto's
they look
pretty.
I
honest question, would you guys rather play Edmonton or Toronto?
Edmonton. I actually like McDavid. I actually like Edmonton. I really don't want to lose to Toronto.
I know.
They're going to get pounded like a roofing nail.
It's going to be a beating.
They're just too deep. Look at
let's
these
keep our
regular season
fingers.
matchups.
Let's keep our fingers crossed, and let's go on to like some more fun topics like COVID and stuff like that.
Exactly.
So let's start with C10. Senator Dennis Dawson, to you, Scott Reid.
Indeed.
Was on the pod just before you, and we talked a little bit about C10 because he has the great honor of presenting that in the Senate, of being the sponsor of that legislation in the Senate. He says, we don't have anything to worry about here at the Herle Burly. He says, they're not after us, and God, he does not imagine that we would ever become popular enough that we would come on the CRTC's radar. He did say, though, Scott, something that you had speculated about to me a while ago. He said this is enormously popular in Quebec, and that this is essential for the Quebec creative class to get some of the revenues out of the tech giants that have been cannibalizing ad revenue and creative spend in Canada for some time. So he acknowledged it had some flaws, so maybe it's going to get amended in the Senate. But
isn't it on
overall,
hold? Isn't it on hold now for a constitutional review?
I don't think a constitutional review. I think that they've said that they're going to do further review of it. I wonder if the bill is. If we're going to have a fall election, I'm not sure this bill will ever make it. I don't know that it'll ever be proclaimed into law.
Right.
And just because I think it'll run out of timetable.
Yeah. He says that all the stakeholders in Canada are on side with this thing, but I don't see anybody in English defending.
Who is he? What stakeholders?
He'd be talking about all of the creators, like Writers Guild, music, all those guys are.
But the biggest stakeholders, of course, are voters.
Right. No, but he was talking about stakeholders. The way government thinks about managing stakeholders. He said they're all on side, but I don't see anybody up there supporting it. I don't see anybody on
all
Twitter
issuing
or anywhere
statements,
else.
but whatever. I saw the Writers Guild put out a statement yesterday.
So we've named 3 stakeholders. That's not all stakeholders. That's a pretty big, broad statement for him to say that all stakeholders are on side when we actually can name 3 between the 3 of us.
Well, I don't think there's a single. Union or guild that's against it. In terms of actors, creators, producers, all of them, they're all in favor of C10, and they're all in favor for the obvious reason, which is that you got these big giant internet companies that are monetizing Canadian content, and they don't contribute, or they don't contribute in any systemic way. And they'll do a one-off deal like that awful Netflix deal, So bringing them into that, it just makes perfect sense. I think this is a great example. I'm not a big fan of all the critics on the bill. I think that most of the criticisms are hyperventilated and untrue. But the problem with the bill, as far as I'm concerned, has been its management. I think that the minister has consistently screwed this up and scored on his own goal, to the point where I think that its passage is in jeopardy because, he goes out and does interviews, and instead of clarifying, he creates greater confusion. And I don't know if it's that he doesn't know the content of his own bill. I suspect that's not the case because he's an intelligent guy. But his communications, there have been 2 big signature interviews that he's been sent out to do in moments of crisis for this in terms of parliamentary management. They required him to put oil on the waters, and he's put a match to the oil. And to my mind, it's a case of mismanagement.
But Scott, why would you say that people's fears are overblown? They're talking about giving because government agencies aren't given power and then don't use them. So we're talking about the CRTC getting power to monitor or to regulate
but that's what
the bill is.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't really say that. If you want to get hardcore into it, right, the bill does is there's more than one level of protection. And
it's user-generated content.
User-generated content that's been monetized, and they don't go after the generators. They don't go after Jenni and David or even air quotes media. They go after YouTube. If we ever got to a place where YouTube was monetizing advertising revenues off of us, he fucked that question up on the weekend on Question Period in CTV. So he completely said something that wasn't true to his own detriment. But look, you've got restrictions in the bill, and they're going to beef those up with respect to what the CRTC does and does not have ability to regulate. They removed the protection that was there before in order to please the musical lobby, and which sparked this whole debate. And then finally, you've got the charter, so there's a whole series of protections there. You have to imagine, I think, a ridiculous set of events. It doesn't regulate individuals that generate content. It would only ask that there be a contribution from the platforms themselves if they monetize the advertising revenues that those users generate. And so, to my mind, that it isn't about the substance of the deal. It isn't about the substance of the bill. It's been about the confused characterization of the bill and the inability of the minister to clarify that.
Now he compared it to. Well, first of all, he makes the point, and it's whether or not this is the right modernization is a different story. But he does make the Dennis made the point that the previous legislation governing telecom and this sector was passed before the internet had been invented. So it's probably fair to update it. He made the comparison to CanCon music back in the 70s. And the CanCon requirements for radio stations in Canada made me listen to a lot of crap, middle-of-the-road music during the 70s and 80s. Thank you, Harlequin. But presumably helped build an industry that has Drake and The Weeknd running the world. So this kind of stuff does work, doesn't it?
I don't even think you need to make that comparison. I just think it's an issue of basic fairness. If the platforms that exist, I think there's a more fundamental question, which is, are we going to permit the Amazons of the world to just make money off of everything that everybody does, generate what we all watch, and lots of it is great, and they produce tremendous amounts of content also. So I'm not bashing that. But if you're going to take people in Canada that create content, and you're going to extract money from their work, you should pitch a little bit of that money back. Maybe not a ton, but some percentage. And that's fundamentally what it does. It says that's how the broadcasters are treated, that's how all the networks are treated, and that's how you're going to be treated. And just because you're big and you cross borders and you exist on the internet doesn't mean that you can't do that. Now, you should, in my view, that does not and should not mean that we're ever in the business of saying, all right, now let's have a look under the hood of what that content is and start regulating it. And I don't think that the bill actually opens the door up to that, and it shouldn't.
Well, but that's what he's talking about. It actually is. It'd be no different than you or I or David or the podcast or someone that's an influencer on YouTube or Facebook. They're under the same guidelines as broadcast. So you're talking about broadcasting.
No, YouTube would. We would not. And we would be, and it explicitly excludes us.
The CRT, okay.
That's not what the bill says, Jenni. That's what people say the bill says, but that's not true. So I'm sorry, but it's not. It's not what 2.1 says, the clause. It's just not what it says. We will not be regulated. YouTube might have to kick back some cash if they start to monetize off of our advertising revenue. They say, hey, look at that. The Herle Burly's making some money off of CN. Okay, let's go.
Well,
but
wait a second.
They don't get into the grill of saying we're going to now say David can't swear or Scott has to shave his beard.
But that's what's his face said on Sunday was actually, well, it might not just be monetary. It's if you have a lot of people. So yes, you can understand why people don't fully trust where the government is going on that. So is it monetary, or because I have 5,000 followers on some platform, that CRTC can come in and regulate me? And sorry, David, I know you were about to say something.
Wait, I just want to respond to that, because that's to me the essence of That's mistake number 2, right? The one he made was the week prior to that. That mistake, I think, this weekend was particularly damning because he feeds the impression that there's some threshold at which air quotes media and the Herle Burly will be regulated on the basis of content. And that's not true. So he literally mischaracterized his own bill and in the process fanned the flames of his own critics. And it's not true. What he was, I think, probably inexpertly trying to say is that if the Herle Burly became so popular that we were attracting so much advertising that YouTube was taking a cut of our advertising, at that point, YouTube would be forced to cough up a little bit of that money.
But who makes that decision?
To the government, and then it would be distributed to Canadian content.
But Scott, who makes that decision? Who makes the decision?
Well, the governments make that decision for everybody, and they always have. But they do not. It has nothing.
No,
at no point are they talking about what we say. They're just saying, "Look, if you guys."
But you can't say that with definitive. It's so open ended.
Sure,
you actually can't say that. No, actually,
I can.
You can't. Oh, well, you can say it, but you would be wrong.
I'm not wrong. Actually, the people that are saying this are wrong. And the minister has helped the people who are criticizing his own bill by being inexact and at some points flat out misleading about his own legislation, which is a bizarro. So he's probably mismanaged this as a parliamentary exercise to the point where it will likely die before, by the time we get to an election.
Okay, but broadcasters, we expect something of broadcasters, and we put demands and conditions on broadcast licenses because the airwaves are a public good that the public owns, and it licenses these broadcasters. It gives them this public benefit, and it says, in return, you must do the following things to earn this public benefit. Are we in the same boat?
No. And that's where, if we tried to do that to the internet, that's where I would drift into Jenni's lane and say, I don't think that, so to me, we shouldn't treat and I think this is what the thesis of the bill is, if it were properly articulated. The thesis of the bill is we're not going to do that. We're not going to regulate the internet as though it were a broadcast platform. What we will say are that the big platforms that use internet technologies to make money off of creators, those guys will have to kick some money back to the country from which they're taking that revenue. And they'll just have to kick back a portion of it. They're not saying you're going to have conditions on you, internet or YouTube or air quotes media or Herle Burly. They're not saying that. They're just saying at the moment at which YouTube starts to make money off of Canadian content, whether it's a Herle Burly or some other podcast or somebody playing music, then at that point, YouTube must kick a percentage of revenue back into the Canadian pool.
Jenni, you've seen a lot of ministers do well or do poorly. This guy is supposed to be a star, and in fact was a star in Quebec before he entered politics in the environmental field, had been a high-profile person for a long time who had a sterling reputation. This is an absolute mess, this rollout of this bill, and his inability to articulate his own objectives is pretty striking.
Why did he have a sterling reputation? The only thing I had heard of him was he tried to climb the CN Tower or something.
No, he's an environmental god. Cool. Yeah, he's an environmental god in Quebec.
Yeah,
it's a huge catch when he ran. Catch when he ran.
Not a huge catch. A huge catch is someone that you don't expect to run. He was in Justin Trudeau's wedding party, or at least we've seen pictures of him from Justin and Sophie's wedding. That's not a catch. That's getting one of your buddies to run for office for you.
Well, except maybe the Trudeaus had an unusually talented wedding party. I mean, yes. The guy was a celebrity in Quebec based on his environmental activism. And I'm just making the point that I presume he's accustomed to handling himself better than this in the public domain.
But not politics, as we've talked about, is an art and a science. And so it's understandable if he's part of the celebrity class in Quebec, probably why C10 is so important for him, because the constituency, the people crying for this seem to be, as you said, the cultural community within Quebec, within one province. And so
not just within one province, to be fair. It's all across the country.
It's mostly just Quebec, though.
No, it isn't. It isn't. I mean, take
political pressure to the extent, Scott, to the extent that it's a political issue, This is not a political issue, content-wise or cultural-wise, anywhere in English Canada.
For sure it is. Well, it's not a political issue in that people are turning their votes on it, but these guys,
Right.
The guilds, the creators, the unions, they've all been asking for it for a long, long time. And there's no difference between, there may be a difference in terms of their political punch in the province of Quebec versus elsewhere, but there's no difference
there
in terms
is.
of
What
the
I'm saying
intensity
is-
of support.
Well, I don't know. The intensity of public support, maybe not stakeholder support, but what I'm saying is there would be, if the government shit-canned this bill tomorrow, there would be zero political consequence in English Canada for that. Zero. Right? But it sounds to me like there would be political consequence in Quebec if they were to do that.
Well, that's a whole other kettle of fish. I'm not even sure that's true. That gets us into our different,
No,
they're a louder
what
voice.
Listen,
here.
so then what the government will do, and I know you asked me a question about Guibeault, so I'll go to that. But ultimately, then what the government is going to want to do on this is I think we've come to some form of agreement. They want an election as soon as possible. So this bill is best left to just languish, and to basically in English Canada they can say. We are not going to regulate. CRTC is not going to regulate what you put on, the cat videos that you post on YouTube and the videos of your grandkids on Facebook. And in Quebec, they can say we're still going to do this. Don't worry, nudge, nudge, and they'll try to play both sides. That's probably what's going to end up happening. In terms of his performance, he's been a weak minister, and to go back to politics is a bit of a skill, and he has proven he is not skillful. And a lot of times when people come. To your point, David, as being a celebrity from different fields, I'm not saying the environmental field or Quebec or have you, they come from different fields. They're not used to actually being questioned. They're not used to the cut and thrust of politics. And we've seen it with people like, we've talked about Iggy a fair bit, and we've seen it with people that just haven't been able to withstand kind of the rigors of politics. And he's obviously fallen into that. He's actually one of the worst performing cabinet ministers that Trudeau has.
I actually think that's kind of a harsh assessment. I don't think that he particularly stood out in English Canada prior to this legislation. I think this is the first time that anybody outside of the province of Quebec has paid particularly close attention to him as a political actor. And so, I don't think he's been a problem before. I think that you could make the argument, well, he seems like he's been relatively safe hands. We know he's a smart person, and he had been in the media glare his entire adult life because of the role that he had at Equiterre in Quebec, and he had a big public following in Quebec. And I just think I couldn't agree with you more, David. I just think he's stick-handled this bill in public very badly. And it's just a couple of really shit interviews. And as far as I can tell, it's been that old problem of you get into government, you get all wrapped up in a piece of legislation, you get wrapped up into the technicalities of something, and suddenly even smart people find themselves unable to communicate at a common sense, street level way.
Wait, stop. Just stop. Because that's not his problem. His problem isn't that he's talking over me. In fact, I watched the CTV interview. He's talking at a level that I can easily understand. He's just not making any sense.
Right.
And so what I said to Dawson about this bill is that I said sometimes when people that are normally good communicators are having trouble communicating something, it's a substantive problem, not a problem with the communicator. It's that there's a hitch, there's a glitch in their story that they can't actually talk their way past.
See, I don't think that's the case here. I think that, in all honesty, I think that you could. I think if this had been handled differently, this thing could have sailed past. There would have been critics who would have raised these issues, and they would have been rebutted. I think it's because he had two terrible outings, and he may not have been trying to talk over people, but he got too caught up in the technicalities, trying to be more Catholic than the Pope in the way he tried to talk about it, and he got himself stumbled. And it's the failure to recognize that you need to clarify and simplify these things in order to conjure up a little bit of consensus. And I think he's done a disservice to the bill. I think the bill is less difficult to communicate than he has left us with the impression of.
So it's 100% a communications issue. So people like Michael Geist and those they don't fully they don't understand.
Michael Geist has a whole other different thesis. Michael Geist has been 100% on the record from the get-go, for years as saying you should not bring anything that's on the internet with any kind of regulatory framework. And so that means that he is opposed to any measure, and he was opposed to the panel, the special panel that reviewed this before. He was opposed to previous level rounds of suggestions for revisions of the Broadcasting Act. He's always been opposed to anything that would permit any government to say, we're going to extract revenues from the big from those big platforms like the Amazons of the world, because he thinks that the internet should be treated differently. Hands off, no way. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how much Amazon makes off of Drake or YouTube makes off of Drake. None of that should be ever kicked back into the Canadian pool. So I'm saying he's got a philosophical difference.
All right. I've talked myself out of being interested in this. Let's move on. Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, appeared yet again before a House of Commons committee last week. Before we get into the content of the testimony, there's a couple things I'd like to kick around with you two. First of all, if we can departisanize this from this current situation. I mean, you both had senior positions in a prime minister's office. I did not. How do you feel about staffers being forced to testify or being asked to testify about the advice they gave or did not give their ministers or the prime minister? Jenni?
Well, we rarely, in the almost 10 years we were in government, we rarely had staff go and testify in committee, even when they were called. Guy Giorno testified on access to information laws, I believe it was. But for the most part, we rarely had staff, bureaucrats, obviously, but we rarely had staff go and talk about the advice that they gave to cabinet. And not to get, I know we're going to get into it. I actually think the Liberals made a mistake having Katie go and testify. I think the story was largely for them, if you're looking at it from a political point of view, was largely not in the news. I know that it might not seem it to them. I remember what it's like to kind of live in the Ottawa bubble, even if we're bubbled in different bubbles and across the country, where an issue seems to be resonating or seems to be hitting you more than it is. And so I think that I think they made a mistake in terms of having her go before the committee. I don't think they needed to. I don't think she should justify advice that she gave. And I think that for the first time that she's been chief of staff, it actually her testimony called into question her competency as chief of staff.
Did anybody have to testify? I'm just thinking of the whole Mike Duffy thing. Was Nigel Wright ever asked to testify before government ops or any parliamentary committee or anybody else, Ray or anyone? I'm just trying to remember. Sorry, I should have researched this prior to the podcast.
Nigel did testify at committee at one point, but I'm not sure if it was on Duffy. Normally when staff were called before committee, ministers would go and the ministers they worked for or the ministers responsible for the file, they would go and testify.
Well, because whatever your advice was, the minister or the prime minister made the decision.
Exactly.
That is the central thing, regardless of what your advice was. And that surely is the principle of our system, isn't it? And second of all, I mean, I don't think the public has a right to know what advice staff gave.
Well, I think we see the collision of two things, both of which can be argued with great passion and legitimacy. I have a bias toward one, but people wouldn't be surprised at my bias. As a former senior staffer, I think that ministers should be forced to testify on these questions, and they should answer all relevant questions about it, and we should never reach into the staff pool. That's not how the system works, and not work that way. And ask the minister what advice he or she got from their chief of staff, and go with it that way. So that's my view. That's how the parliamentary system should work. It's how it has traditionally worked. I think the reason that it is getting breached, one, it's a circumstance thing, because we have minority parliaments, and so you can control a committee and you can demand, and then governments have to issue manage, and do we not go, and if we don't go, and all that kind of shit. But I think the broader issue that's underlying it is that you see so much authority, and over 25, 30, 40 years, we've seen power congregate in the hands of senior staff, like ourselves over the years. So people say, well, if I want to find out what the truth is of who said what to whom, asking the Minister of Defense is only going to get me so far. I need to know what the conversations were among 4 senior staffers in the PMO, because that's where the fucking decision ended up getting made. And so we see that it's that trend toward concentration of political authority in the unelected hands of advisors that is causing, that provides legitimacy to the demand that staff should appear. But overall, I still say screw that. I think that it should be ministers, being accountable for what they say, what their staff said, all that.
Well, and to David's point, it's at the end of the day, it's the minister that makes the ultimate decision. Whether they make it internally under duress or not, they still end up having to go and make the decision. And so I think for the Conservatives and the NDP calling on, I know the NDP or the Conservatives had an opposition day motion calling on, the firing essentially of Katie Telford. As much as we were all known within Ottawa circles and among the political class, no one has a clue who any of us are outside of politics. And so if you're trying to bring someone down over a scandal, I'm not sure why you would I hate to say it, waste your time on Katie Telford or a staffer. You want to go after the prize. You want to go after the minister. Like, that's taking down a minister is a big thing. And this would be kind of the second time in less than a year, because of course the opposition brought down Morneau. So this would be that would be more of a prize than fighting going after Katie Telford. And I don't think anyone believes for a second that Katie Telford conspired to hide the fact that General Vance couldn't keep his dick in his pants while he was CDS and leading into that. So it's just not a believable narrative to have. It's preposterous, really.
But doesn't part of this happen because ministers won't take accountability anymore? That ministerial responsibility is dead. I guess I'm quoting John Ivison from the other day, but it's a valid point. I mean, this ended up with Katie because Sagen wouldn't take responsibility. Sagen is the opposite of the buck stops with me. Sagen is, hey, I don't know where the buck stops, but it does not stop with me.
Well, he was the brains behind Operation Medusa, don't forget.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I don't know exactly what went down in this case. Obviously, none of us do precisely what the conversations were, but in abstract, though, it's an interesting point. Yeah, maybe ministers are less accountable, but, maybe look at it from the perspective of the minister. And the minister's like, well, frankly, I didn't make the call on the file. Frankly, what happened was, you know what I mean? That often, maybe they're going, well, for Christ's sake, right? I mean, let's be honest about it. The decision did get made in the PMO, and then I was involved when it came time to execute the decision. So you can see how all these, the truth of the matter is our system has morphed from what it was supposed to be and what it was. And so it creates all these kind of idiosyncrasies. I just wish that when we get back to a majority government world, we could get kind of an all-party where it's easier to depoliticize it. You get an all-party agreement saying, all right, you know what? We're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to play that card anymore. We're not going to go after staff. We're going to make the ministers squirm and sweat.
But you guys did that when the opposition did that when we were in a majority territory. Like, it is what it is. It is.
I don't like it though. Well, I don't give a shit who's pulling that trigger. I don't like that play.
Yeah, it's part of the art of politics.
Yeah.
Right. How did she do? Did either of you watch?
I didn't watch. Yeah, sir. Go ahead, Scott.
Sorry, I thought it was a non-event. I thought she handled it. If you don't like Katie and you're like, oh, this government is so woke, you're going to go all over that. If you do, then you're going to say yeah, right on, sister, she did great. I think the most important takeaway is that it didn't do anything. It didn't achieve anything. Nothing. So I think she's been called before committees twice now, and I think both times it's been a wet firecracker. It hasn't become an event that has caused oh my God, now there's a brand new development on this. It's not Dominic Cummings over in Britain, blowing up the Prime Minister's office and causing internal eruptions. So I think ultimately she did terrific by the most important standard, which is, did it matter a day later? And it didn't.
Well, I don't think it matters because I don't think it matters to many Canadians. I think there's so much going on that matters to them. I think she could have dropped bombs in there, and I don't think it would have mattered, because I don't think the average person is paying attention. And I think I know we have talked about this before. I wouldn't have put her out there. I think it did. I think that there were questions that remained unanswered about why she wouldn't have told the Prime Minister about, if she was so concerned about it. Like, you can't say I'm very concerned about something, but yet I was so concerned I didn't tell the Prime Minister. And having briefed a Prime Minister for 10 years and having briefed a Premier, that just wouldn't have happened. If you had that grave of concern about something, it would have come up in some kind of context. So I think that it left her vulnerable there, as I said, in terms of competency, which I think is unfair, because she's obviously a very competent person. Because I've said this before, you can understand how this was a very hard thing unless you wanted to really delve down. You had a ombudsman who had a complaint that he kind of went around the edges but didn't say that it was. You had the complainant who wouldn't come out, and so I just think that, like, the questions the government should be answering, or the military, is General Vance, what the one thing we know for absolute certain is he broke military law. He broke the law and should be court-martialed. Like, that's the one thing we know for sure that he did. He engaged in a relationship, personal relationship with someone who was under technically his command. That's the one thing that the government or the military should be, could be moving forward on.
Can I add?
Here's one thing I don't believe. Here's one thing I don't believe, and I'd like either one of you to try to convince me that this is true. And I don't mean to be a dick about this, but I'm supposed to, I guess, understand that there were meetings in which the Prime Minister was considering whether or not to actively promote Vance for the NATO chairmanship. And that in the meetings where that would be considered, that Katie and the clerk would sit there mute while the Prime Minister considered whether or not to put his reputation on the line internationally behind Vance. Find that very hard to believe.
It is. I don't think I don't think it is believable, and I can say for like, it would not have happened under our government.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. The only way you can conjure up a narrative that makes it seem make sense is that you're living in a world where you say, I dare not mention this, because since I don't know what I don't know about it, I can't mention it. I can't uncork this. I have to rely on the PCO process, and I dare not mention it. But boy, that would take more discipline than I have. I think, like, I'd be like, kind of like,
well, if that's how it went down, it's irresponsible. Like, that, then you're not. Then there's no. Why would a politician have a political staff if they're not going to actually communicate what's happening or what could be potential problems for you, like landmines for you?
Well, you'd have to say, look, there's some warts on this thing, man, and it's dangerous.
Yeah, but that's still your job. It's still you work directly for the boss. The bureaucrats have cover because we come and go and they stay. We're there to protect and to serve the political bosses. And if that's how it all went down, then that was a huge disservice to Trudeau.
Can I make one more point before we move on, David? That's not about the specifics of Vance and stuff, all of which I confess, to be honest with you, and this may underlines, I think, Jenny's point that she's always made on this, which is that I'm not sure it tracks with people. I myself, I don't know the details of it. I just haven't been able to find the juice to, like, interest myself to read thoroughly on it. So that tells you something. Is that if it can't captivate me, how is it going to captivate my aunt in Uxbridge? But we've had two occasions, just going back to this broader question about staffers testifying, whether that's a precedent you want to pursue and deepen, because it feels like it's been pretty, we've had a number of staffers testify now, and there's demands for more, and it feels like that trend is is starting to institutionalize itself. That this will be a go-to that's harder and harder to deny on the basis of no, it ought to be the minister. And it's like that feels like that line has been crossed so often now that it's going to be harder to get back to. One of the idiosyncrasies, I think, of this situation, a perversity of it, is that I think that Katie's testified on the hot seat twice, and she's done well both times. Like, it just, at the end of the day, she wasn't left reeling. She wasn't left bloodied. The government didn't find itself in crisis afterwards. She wasn't in crisis in terms of having to quit her post or something like that. And the successful
she's a hugely articulate debater. That isn't true of every staffer.
Well, this is where I'm going, right? So there's a little bit of a pernicious element to her success in managing these creates a challenge in that, in a weird way, it removes the fear that the system ought to have, and that all people, like, it doesn't matter which political party you're in. If you are now a senior staffer, or if you might be a senior staffer to a future prime minister in another political party, and someone goes out there and Katie had blown herself to smithereens, you might go, holy fuck, there but for the grace of God go I, and let's stop this train because I might find myself on it one day. And in a weird way, the success with which she's managed those two testimonies might perversely make it more likely that others will be forced to testify in the future. And I guarantee you that not everybody will have a successful set of outings as she's had.
100%. But that goes into kind of the, when staffers become personalities themselves. That's not our job. So Katie, Jerry, the whole crew around Trudeau, their style was a lot different than what I can say we had. Like I could walk through the lobby of the after question period when the press gallery was about to do scrums, and no one knew who I was. It's a different cultural thing. So that's what they brought to that. And with the good.
Well, you didn't post pictures. You didn't post pictures of yourself offering people cabinet positions.
Yeah, it's a slightly different era too, right? All this, everything's online now, and
so, don't get me wrong. There were pictures of meetings that were posted, but it wasn't about us as staff. And so this is the problem. So Katie is she's, as you said, she's a great debater. She's qualified. She's good on her feet, but it's not about her. It's about Justin Trudeau. No. It is not about anyone that works in Langevin, and I still call it Langevin, regardless of the fact that they changed the name. It's not who works in Langevin. It's not who works in the minister's office. We serve to the pleasure of the people that have the balls to put their name on ballots and on signs and are like publicly take the arrows. So the problem with this is by kind of highlighting and like putting out releases like, so-and-so staffer is going to testify. Well, fuck, it's not about you. It's about this. This is an issue about Justin Trudeau, Harjit Sajjan, General Vance, who was appointed as CDS. And that's the problem that I have with the culture of this whole conversation that we're having.
But it's interesting. I'm not sure I agree with a fundamental assumption with you. I'm on your side on this argument vehemently, obviously. But, you said earlier, if it's about the minute, that it's more important to take down more no than it is Katie Telford. I don't think that's necessarily true in this government. I think that Katie Telford's absence from the team matters a whole lot more than more no's. And every day sort of proves it.
Yeah, but you're getting into inside baseball. So I guess to my point is you said that staff shouldn't be called. But to your point then, staff can't put themselves out there. So you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, no, that's right.
You can't put yourself out there and say, I'm willing to be called and be a public face for this government. And then say, well, I'm staff, I'm not a public face.
We used to get it all the time, David? People are like, the Martin crew, they're like self-promoters, and look at them, they're all over the place and all this stuff. And I'm like, we're pikers. I in the celebrity pecking order, I'm like Dom DeLuise compared to Will Smith out there from the Trudeau guys, right? Like it's just a whole other world.
Well, you may have forgotten that I did a parliamentary committee. I was summoned before a parliamentary
I have not. I remember
committee.
I remember it quite well. It became quite a moment. You lost your temper at the parliamentary committee hearing. You got a little angry.
The chair said to me, show the committee some respect. And I said to the chair, I'm showing the committee as much respect as they're showing me. Which was none.
And you said it in a neutral manner. Yeah. See,
Well, there was the
fucking
other part. There was the other.
Kind of was in parentheses, right, hanging in the air. Everybody heard the fucking part, even if you didn't say it, right?
All right.
I enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. Well, I got in there and I realized immediately that this is not a fact-finding mission, and that this is not an exercise that is designed to get to the truth. That it was a purely, I mean, you realize it once you're in it, what it's like. And so it was a purely partisan exercise.
You're there to be bent over the dishwasher.
Conservatives had brought in Peter MacKay as their ringer onto the committee. And because he wasn't a regular part of the committee, he was their ringer. And I just realized this thing is a circus. So I'm going to call it for what it fucking is. And I just blew it up. It's fun.
A ringer.
I look back on it fondly.
Ringer.
When I was appointed to the Ontario Energy Board after I left the Premier's office, I was told there's going to be a 30-day window where they're going to call you to committee. The opposition could call you, and I was like, "Fuck!" Like I got to handle energy policy, what have you, but I was afraid it would be like a fact fishing. So we'd have two words for you: Ron Tavener, Dean French, like all this kind of stuff. And the opposition completely dropped the ball, and I was never called before committee. But every day I would sit there, like I'd message my friend in the Premier's office going, "Hey, did they call me to committee? Did they call me to committee? Do I have to be ready?"
And what am I going to say? No.
I would just show up. I've never had to testify for a committee, and thank God, because it would just be like, "Hi, I've got my lighter fluid, I've got my matches, and I'm happy to proceed when you are, Mr. Chair." I would be over. It would be done.
Oh my God. All right. So Ontario this week, something interesting. A first, something that I'm going to say has never happened before, and you can correct me. But the provincial government took out ads against the federal government. Has that ever happened before? Seriously, anybody remember that ever happening before? I don't think it has.
Did McGuinty's government take out ads on the fiscal imbalance against us? I don't know if they took. They
not political ads against the Trudeau Liberal, the Martin Liberals, or anything like that. No, they might have taken out informational ads, but. I mean, it's a hell of a thing to do. So there's a whole lot to unpack about this. What kind of trouble do they think they're in? First of all, this all got very political. So all of a sudden, Cuvalis is got a high profile again. The party announced that Corey is going to be running the campaign, and they come out with this big ad campaign, which I understand they're putting money behind. I had some questions about, but I understand they're putting money behind it. So an unprecedented tactic. Highly risky, as we talked about in advance of the ad campaign coming out. What kind of situation do they find themselves in that they feel the need to do this? And what end result do they hope this ad campaign will bring about? Jenni Byrne.
Well, I actually think they think they're, based on people that I've spoken to, I think they think they're in good shape. Not good shape as in where they were last year at this time. I think I've said before, I think that, if Doug could go in a time machine and go back to the popularity that he was last year at this time, he'd be very happy. I do think they realize, though, that they are vulnerable on things that they weren't before. Vaccine rollout is one of them, although it's become less. It's lockdowns. Ontario remains probably one of the most lockdown jurisdiction in the entire world now, and there doesn't seem to be any change to that. So I think that the ads are a bit of a deflection, which has actually been a different course of strategy, a change of strategy, because regardless of kind of what the narrative builds up about Doug taking on the feds, he really hasn't. He's been a premier that has cozied up to Trudeau and Freeland, and so this has been a complete change in direction. And as we said last week in leading up to this, I think it could end up backfiring depending on kind of what happens in the progression of COVID in Ontario.
It's interesting, Scott, before you say anything, that Dennis said, just quick interrupting him, that Dennis said that I mean, things in Quebec have gone the opposite way. That Legault started off being very confrontational with the Trudeau government and has over time decided that that's bad politics and that the good politics lies in looking like you're working arm in arm with the federal government. So everything's hunky-dory now in Quebec.
But Trudeau's made that easy, right? Like Trudeau's willing to pick fights with Doug and Kenney on certain things, or at least make comments to them that he's not willing to do with Legault.
I think it's obvious. I think it's an obvious problem, which is that Ford, as you know, it was crystallized in that brutal 2-3-4 day stretch when they issued all the restrictions and couldn't explain it. And there's all the stories about how they came to the decisions. And I think it just landed as bad as anything I've ever seen with the public. It left them in a place where I think they went to the focus groups and said, what do people have to say here that isn't just bad about us? And they found that people were willing to accept and would nod their heads if you said, look, we got to do something more on borders. And that fault lies with Trudeau. So I assume that their entire objective is not to rehabilitate themselves, but to cause some bruises elsewhere, and just because they're taking 100% of the agony and they want to spread it around. I think the interesting question is, what happens if the ads are effective? What happens if the weight of them and the invisible weight of them, because I think it's mostly a social buy, and so it may not be as apparent as previous. In previous times, what if you're tracking? What if you start to see that your approvals are taking a bit of a hit if you're Trudeau? Because I think the initial response from the Trudeau government was good. I thought that the letter back, to the Premier saying, Jesus, man, this makes no sense. Here's the things that your ad says, but you haven't even asked for those things officially. Some of those things are triggered by like foreign students or something you explicitly approve. So are you now saying you would withdraw the approvals for the 30,000 international students that come into Ontario? So, I thought that was effective, but it was effective with the Toronto Star. It was effective with the Globe and Mail. It was effective with us. Is it penetrating with real people? And if these ads do start to track, not helping Doug enormously, but if they start to dig into the approvals of the Trudeau government, what are the weapons in your belt that you reach for? What, do you go to the batarang? Do you go to the anti-shark repellent? What do you reach for if you're the Trudeau government? If you're an Ontario minister, how do you battle back on that? Do you do something substantive on borders to try to neutralize it? Do you amplify this to delegitimize the issues? I think that's what's interesting. What happens if it works?
So here's my thoughts in no particular order. I don't think Trudeau will do anything on the borders, because doing something on the borders will mean that it seems a bit more chaotic than it already is in Canada. And I truly believe he wants to have an election sooner than not. I think their strategy of pushing it back into the province's court is smart as well. Who do you mean? So foreign travel is actually banned, and there are exceptions. Like it's banned to anyone but residents and permanent residents and Canadians. So who do you mean in the exemptions should not be allowed? And we even saw that Del Duca and the Liberals were pushing back on that last week in terms of asking Doug that as well. So obviously there is some, they picked up at least on what the federal level is, letter was. I also think there's a difference between who are you going to vote for in the next election and what the approval is for governments in COVID. And I know we've talked about this, and David, this is your thing, so you can weigh in. But I think there's a difference by saying I approve how Doug is handling X measures and whether I'm going to vote for him. It's kind of, not to go back, but I do like to do that. If we went back a year ago, Scott, to some of the podcasts that we did, whereas I was very critical of the provincial government. Has
this ever been referenced before? Is this a new point?
I'm teasing, kind of. But I think that there's a difference between and it'd be interesting to see exactly what internal polls are showing and questions that they're being asked, because I really truly believe there's a difference between I approve the government's handling of X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to vote for this government in a year.
So let's follow up on that. what is the intended result of these commercials? So when I'm in 2018 and I run a negative ad against Ford, I'm running the Win campaign and I run a negative ad against the Conservatives, I'm hoping to convince people not to vote for the Conservatives and hoping that they don't think about the NDP and they vote for me instead, because I'm a direct competitor of the Ford Conservatives. So I attack them, hopefully people vote for me. What is this attack on the Feds supposed to do for the Ford Conservatives?
Well, but
they're not running against them.
That's the thing.
So is the theory that the worse people think of Trudeau, the better they'll think of Ford?
I think it's a deflection of, listen, it's not our fault of how miserable you feel your life is in Ontario, the only jurisdiction in the world that doesn't allow people to golf, and I hate golf, so it doesn't it's not a personal issue for me. I think it's a deflection to which, David, to your point, is what does that do? It's if they put a serious buy behind it, it's almost a waste of advertising. It's to try to just get through this current. Like, it's not like when we did the Dion ads or the Iggy ads where we did it like ad nauseum for a year and a half to 2 years before, and it was driving a message in. Conceivably, this message in 3 months is not going to be a message. Borders are not going to be a message. Right. So this is so what does this actually get the Doug Ford Conservatives? And I don't know what the long term.
I don't know.
Well, let me take a crack because I think, first of all, I'm in agreement with all of us. We know, I've said before, my general view is I think that this is more likely to backfire and not likely to help very much. I don't think that when you're on fire, the smart strategy is to say, please pay attention to the fire. I think you try to find something that people will admire about you to talk about. But to my mind, that if you want to say what's the logic of it, it isn't a one-step thing. It isn't let's use these ads to define Iggy or Dion. I think, when you're this deep down a well, you don't get out by jumping. When you're this deep down a well, it's step number one is to get a rope. Step number two is to pull yourself up, right? And I think this is step number one, this ad campaign. I think they have 80% disapproval in terms of the way Ford has handled COVID. It's crystallized in the last few weeks. And so I think their sole objective is to make certain that some of that disapproval gets spread around. They don't need people to like them more. They just want people to, in the near term, be reminded that the blame isn't wholly on Doug, that it's also on Trudeau. And I think their thesis is that's a necessary precondition to getting reconsidered in the future, that they can't get to reconsideration with an eye toward re-election unless people go, you know what, in retrospect, everybody fucked that thing up. And so I'm not solely going to freight him with the responsibility. I think the second thing it's doing is it's an insurance policy against a fourth wave. In case there is a fourth wave, they want to have it not be 80% on them. They want to make certain that thing is well attributed in advance, and they've created a narrative that attributes to borders and to Trudeau and to the feds. Whether that's true or not, whether it happens or not, I think there may be an insurance policy in it. So I think that's the logic of these ads. I'm not sure it will be realized, but I think that's what they're thinking.
I don't think it'll work. If you're going to try to fight the feds on something, if that's what you've decided is what you want to do, and I'm not saying it's the right. I actually think it feeds into Justin Trudeau's playbook. If I'm Justin Trudeau, I want to campaign against Doug Ford. He's the boogeyman. Aaron O'Toole is so irrelevant.
Who's O'Toole?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He's so irrelevant. It's why Conservatives aren't even upset about the carbon tax. Everyone I speak to is almost like, let's just get through this. Let's just get let's get the election over with so we can kind of move on. And so it's a sad. It's a sad. That's basically.
I'm like the rebound girlfriend. I'm just like, all right. You're gonna date me for a while, and then you're gonna go online and find someone new. All right.
Listen, I'm shocked by the number of people. So I think that these ads play into Trudeau's hands. That being said, if you want to actually take the feds on something, Take something on that are current and that you can actually take them on. I think the feds fucked up the border 14 months ago, but it's been 14 months of Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau, and Doug Ford singing Kumbaya together at like a campfire. So that's like, it's kind of water out under the bridge. I think that Canada is still very vulnerable on vaccines, and for a whole host of reasons, from supply to now issues on approval with AstraZeneca. We've had Alberta announced today that they're no longer giving the AZ shot. Ontario has quietly apparently made the same decision as well. And so I think there is a lot of, I think there is issues regarding COVID that you can actually—
Give me my second one. Then give me my fucking second
exactly.
one.
That's what they should do. They should give everybody their second. My dad and stepmom got the AstraZeneca too. Just give everyone that had it their second one. But I guess to my point, though, David, is there is a lot of stuff that I think that Ford and the provinces could go after the feds on, and I think that I'm not sure the border issue is actually going to be that effective.
So agree with you. I so agree with you. The reason this ad campaign will fail and fail miserably is two things, and it all has to do with earned media. First of all, no matter how much money they put behind this, $2-3 million would be a lot of money in terms of a buy. They're facing daily tens of millions of dollars of media that say the other thing, that say the opposite of that. And so their message is getting drowned by the earned media saying the opposite of what their advertising is saying. And the second of all, and I thank Bill Fox for this insight many years ago, that all the theory tells you that when you have when you are paying for an paid media message, at the same time that there is earned media, that every time people hear your paid message, their mind goes to the earned, because the earned is more credible. If the earned reinforces your paid, you're golden. If the earned contradicts your paid, you're fucked. So for those two reasons, this ad campaign is a waste of money and effort on the part of the Conservatives.
So we have consensus on that, because I agree completely with that. I'll just add one last thing, and that is, I'll go back to the question I posed, which is, what if these ads do start to track? I think the mistake for the federal Liberals would be to fight on this basis and to respond with greater firepower around the border. I wouldn't do that. I would pump out stories day after day after day about how many millions of vaccines are coming in this week and what is being done in terms of starting to facilitate a recovery. I would counter program those messages with things that we know that people want to report on, things that people will listen to, the sort of shit that here in Toronto leads the CP24 broadcast, and just counter program that message on borders and overwhelm it. Don't try to fight it, eclipse it.
All right. Hey, we've already had a long pod, and we haven't even got to our hey yous yet.
A long
pod today. A long pod today. CN getting their money's worth. All right.
Don't tell Guibeault.
No, that's right. We're gonna get CRTC'd.
Who wants to go first with their hey you?
I'll go first because
mine's sentimental.
So we just touched on it. My hey you is to the federal government in terms of vaccines. I know I've done a ton of these. But there is just so much confusion out there, and the longer the confusion is out there, the more people are going to be hesitant to get vaccines, and also people are starting to get nervous in terms of the intervals between the vaccinations, and so we're seeing the rest of the world open up. The U.S. is very open. Europe is saying they're going to start taking people that are fully vaccinated, and I think that Canadians have I think they're being overly optimistic, thinking their one shot is going to be seen. If there is vaccine passports, the same way as people that have gotten 2 shots in the U.S. and elsewhere, and I think that there needs to be some clarification and some so the government needs to communicate more clearly regarding vaccines in Canada and what the status of all things are.
Couldn't agree more. Like to know myself, Scott.
My hey you goes out to Mark Garneau, Mary Ng, Karina Gould, all ministers in this Trudeau government who have responsibility for foreign affairs issues. Last week, President Biden said that he would waive patent protection for vaccines, that he would invoke what's called the TRIPS waiver under the WTO. It was an unexpected, bold move. It's really, really, really necessary. And it's necessary because the reality is that where vaccines have been distributed, it is overwhelmingly in the developed world. And if we're worried about where new variants will breed, it's where people aren't vaccinated and the virus is still free to spread. If we're worried about what it's going to take to get back to normal, it's a world in which we're all safe, not just some of us are safe, because this thing doesn't carry a passport and it doesn't care about borders. And so I want to see Canada, which has been reluctant to sign on immediately to the same policy, do so. I know you're in negotiations with those big pharmaceutical companies. I know we're demanding that we get 1 million, 2 million doses a week. And I know it's awkward to pick up the phone, call those same companies, beg them to send more shipments. At the same time, you're holding press conferences saying you're going to take away their patent protection on a temporary basis. But this goddamn waiver exists for a global crisis to be invoked in a time of crisis. And if we're not in a global crisis right now, and if the need isn't pronounced right now, I don't know when it possibly could be. Biden has created the political room to do it. Follow, act now, don't talk, don't negotiate, don't wait for others internationally to move now.
Yeah, it's not like we have any credibility on patent protection for pharmaceuticals we need to protect or something like that. They already fucking hate us on this issue already, right? So
for sure. I assume it's just a transactional worry. I don't know, but I assume that's what the problem is.
All right. My hey you goes out to I had Dennis Dawson on, my 40-year-old friend from Quebec, talking about Quebec politics. And you can't get through that conversation without wishing that our also 40-year-old friend who went through all the same battles with us, Jean Lapierre, had been there to be part of that conversation. I was reminded throughout the whole conversation of the fact that Jean is missing. And so he was a super smart, infectiously energetic, really funny, great, public-spirited guy, and I miss Jean Lapierre terribly. So, super sky point from the Herle Burly to Jean Lapierre. Hey, you.
I second that emotion.
Right. Thank you all for being here this week. It was a fun pod, even if a bit long. I hope people stayed with us. And we'll see you next week. Didn't mean to bring you down, Jenny.
No, I never met him, so I feel very bad. I didn't.
He was a lovely guy.
You
Have a great week, guys.
All right. See ya.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. All right. That's it for the pod this week. I would like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail. I would love to thank Dennis Dawson for coming on the show, my old friend, and talking about Quebec with us. Jenny and Scott bringing their usual A game to the podcast. I'd like to thank the Air Quotes media team behind this and Metal Donkersgood, our engineer. And I would really ask you, if you could, to work your way through the iTunes website and give us a rating and a review on the Apple Podcast website. It really helps get the word around about the podcast. It helps promote the podcast, and it's very, very helpful to us. So if you like what you heard, please go and give us a rating and a review. Really helpful. If not, a shout out on social media is just as welcome. Take care for another week. See you.
Herle Burly, Herle Burly, oh Herle Burly, oh Herle Burly, Herle Burly.